When I first started doing YouTube, I really loved seeing all these cool effects that you could do, and who knew? They were so easy. I love the season of Halloween, so I thought, well, let's do a Halloween effect. Let's do a disembodied head. It's gonna look something like this. So when we're done with this tutorial, you're gonna know how to do that in After Effects. Let's get to it. My name is Michael Feyrer Jr. This channel is dedicated to helping make you a better filmmaker and YouTuber. If that's the sort of thing you're into, please subscribe to the channel and click that bell so you know when I have new content that comes out. A couple of things that are going to set up today's tutorial. The first thing you're going to want to do is film two scenes. One with your head and one would be the regular scene where you're going to remove your head. You can film these scenes in front of a green screen. I chose not to film them in front of a green screen just to show you that it was possible to do this without that. Filming it without a green screen does add in an element of difficulty to the process, and of course I'll go through the differences as I go through the tutorial. A couple of things that you want to know. When you're filming each scene, because we're going to be doing rotoscoping in After Effects, you're going to want to bump up your shutter speed. You want as little motion blur in your footage as you can get. It's really difficult to rotoscope motion blur. So I bump my shutter speed up to 250 when I'm filming the sequences that I'm going to use, and you should probably do the same thing. You do add that motion blur back in at the end of the process, so the footage is still going to have the same kind of realistic motion blur you'd normally get. But when you're rotoscoping in After Effects, you want as little motion blur as possible. It just makes things a lot easier, especially when you're not using a green screen. And at the end, I'm going to show you the clip that I created once it's all put together, and there's a little surprise at the end. I didn't show you how to do it, but I can. If you're interested, you want to leave a comment to let me know. So let's jump into the computer and I'll show you how to do this effect. Go ahead and open up After Effects, and the first thing you're going to want to do is click New Composition. You want to set your composition up the way that you deem necessary. You don't really need to worry about how long it is. You can reset this later, but just set your resolution and your frames per second. It should pretty much match the footage that you just filmed. I filmed in 4K, but I don't want my footage set at 4K in After Effects. It just creates all kinds of problems because I'm using an old computer. So I set my size at 1920 by 1080. When you're finished setting up your composition, you just click OK. The next thing I'm going to do is browse to my head footage. This is the footage that I took to isolate my head in the shot. I add this to my project file, and then I go ahead and drag it into my timeline. Because I shot my footage in 4K, I do have to resize it here in the window. I just grab one of these corners and move it around. I click the Shift key to keep the aspect ratio, and then I drag it to the size that I want it. And I just resize the window so I have a good view. What we're going to be doing with this head sequence is we're going to be removing the entire background. To do this, we're going to rotoscope. So you want to go up and select your rotoscoping tool. Next, in your timeline, you just want to double click on your footage. This will open up a rotoscoping window in your center console display. All you do is draw on the area you want to select. You can see this represented by the green line. Once you select your area, you see a pink outline around what After Effects thinks you're selecting. The next thing you want to do is zoom in and just get a finer selection. So any areas that are missed, go ahead and draw little lines through those using the rotoscoping green tool. And if you want to remove an area that it's selected, go ahead and click the Alt key and then draw a line there. You see when you select the Alt key, it comes up red, so your line will be erasing areas that you don't want included. Now I'm going to show you how to use the Refine Edge tool. So you go up to your rotoscope icon and you just select that. It'll drop down and you select the Refine Edge tool. Now this works a little bit differently. You want to trace around the edges of what's already been selected. What this does is it includes all those fine little hairs that are kind of sticking out there, and it'll add those into our final image. You can see when it comes up, it shows you kind of this black and white, which is just the alpha. If you click this little key here, you can change what you see to the red or the black. When you change it to the black background, you can see exactly what you're going to see in your final edit. Now there are some areas that I don't want in my final edit. That'd be the green of my shirt. So I go back up and I select my regular rotoscope tool. And I go down here and I select the Alt key and I just remove those from the edit. Now you can see there's a little bit of a halo that shows the color of the background through the top of my hair. This really isn't a problem given the fact that the final cut is going to be in front of the same background, so having that little halo isn't really going to stand out. If you were going to do this in front of a green screen, it makes it much easier. You can just key out the background using one of the tools, and as long as you're wearing a green shirt that's about the same color as the green screen, you can basically get the floating head effect with almost no work. Rotoscoping is definitely a much tougher process. You can see here we've essentially created one frame in our rotoscope. Next we have to move on and do every frame, but not really every frame, and I'll show you what I mean. Once you have your initial frame rotoscoped out and it's exactly what you want, you're going to notice there's a little blue dot down in the timeline. And let's go ahead and zoom in this timeline a little bit. And you see next to the blue dot you have this little gray bar area. This is the area that After Effects thinks it can inference your rotoscope. So we're going to take our playhead and we're going to move it out to the end of the bar. When you do this, you're going to see this little green line come from the blue dot all the way to your playhead. And that's After Effects building each rotoscope frame. Once the green line gets to your playhead, you're going to see your frame change and it'll show you the current frame with the rotoscope. Here you want to just take a look and see if the rotoscope hasn't gone off the rails somewhere. As you can see in this case, up in the top left hand corner of my hair, it went off the rails somewhere. So the next thing we have to do is go back in the timeline and find the frame where the rotoscope stopped working properly. In this case, I have to go all the way back to the first frame and I can see that I didn't have it scoped quite properly. You can see there we're already seeing some blue through my hair. So we're going to want to go and we're going to want to erase that and use the fine brush tool in order to fix that area. Now we can just move our playhead once again to the end of the gray bar and let the green line build each frame, and let's see what we get this time. And you can see it seems to have gone through that entire frame series without messing up again. So what I'll do is I'll bring up the preview window and click forward to the next frame that's off that little gray bar in the timeline. And you can see we don't have any rotoscope selected here, and that's because it's the beginning of a new area where we're going to inference those frames again. So what you want to do is select your rotoscoping tool and go ahead and rotoscope it just like you did before and fine tune it all. This is the frame that the next set of frames are going to be referenced from. So you want to make it as clean as you possibly can. And you use your fine edge tool the same way as we did on the initial frame. And if all of this goes right, you should really only have to do one in every 25 or 30 frames. Sometimes it works right, sometimes it doesn't. I made my life a lot more difficult by not just having a plain background. My hair in this image likes to get sticky with the bookshelves in the background, and it created all kinds of reasons for me to have to continue to go back and edit the frames over and over again. In some cases, I had to do each individual frame in the inferenced frame set. So make your life easy, and if you're going to film this without a green screen and you're going to do it rotoscoped, make sure that your background is pretty clean and there's not much in it. Once you get that initial frame, we do the same thing. We move our playhead down to the end of the gray bar and we let After Effects build those frames for us. And you can see here it built these frames pretty nicely. I don't have to do anything. I go ahead and check it using the black background. It always seems to make it a lot easier to see. Then I'll click forward to go and build the next series. I go ahead and rotoscope the areas that I need to rotoscope. Use the fine edge tool. Now a couple of tricks that I want to tell you here. You can expand the size of your rotoscoping tool or make it smaller by holding the command and pushing up and down on the mouse. It will make the tool bigger or smaller. This works exactly the same for the fine edge brush rotoscoping tool as well. You can also hit the Alt key on the fine edge brush tool to remove areas where you don't want a fine edge anymore. This third series turned out to be a big pain in the butt. I turned my head and After Effects doesn't exactly know what the selection should be. Here you've got to go ahead and expand your selection area or contract it as necessary. You can also see a section down here in my shirt that continues to not be selected, so I have to go back and reselect that. In this particular case, you really want to make sure you go back to the very first frame where things go bad, correct that frame, and move ahead a couple of frames to see if it's continuing to be corrected or whether it goes off the rails again. Like I said, sometimes you won't have to do anything for a full sequence, and sometimes you're going to end up correcting every frame. It's just the way it goes. Having the cleanest background possible is what's going to make it a lot easier for you to go through this process. So you just want to go through this process for the entire clip that's going to remove your head. Once you finish rotoscoping your entire clip, you want to go here and click on the freeze. This will basically take a snapshot of every frame's rotoscope and freeze it in place. Now you're ready to move on to the next step. Your head is fully rotoscoped. The next process I'm going to show you is not something you would have to do. It really depends on what you decide to do with your disembodied head. In my case, I wanted to put it on a PVC pipe. This means that it was going to be tracked to the top of the PVC pipe. It also means that the initial head video has to be very steady. Now, I could have accomplished a very steady head video by just putting something that would isolate my head so that it wouldn't move very much. I didn't do this because I wanted to spin around in the video and show a rotating head as well. So I came up with this process in order to isolate my head so it doesn't move very much. The reason why the head can't move in the footage is because it's going to be tracked on another object. And if the head footage moves around a lot, it's not going to stay on top of that track. So I needed the head to be perfectly centered in the footage and also relatively stable. I could have made this much easier on myself just filming it, so that my head stayed in the same location using some sort of prop or making it static. But nobody ever accused me of being smart. So in this case, I went up here and I created a shape, and that would be a box right around my head. Next, I make sure that anchor is right in the center of that box. The easiest way to do this is to click the pan under tool, then hold down Command and Option and double click on the pan under tool. It will move your anchor point right to the center of the box. Then I use the align tools to line the box to the absolute center of the image. Next, I went all the way to the beginning of the footage and I clicked the little stopwatch next to position, scale, and rotation for my head video. The next thing I do, and this takes forever, is I go through each frame and I move the head into the center of the box, and I rotate it so it has the same rotation in every frame, or about the same rotation. The key here was just to make the head as absolutely stable as I could possibly make it. Even when I rotate around, as you can see here, I just go ahead and put that head in the center of the frame. If I need to rescale so it fits in the frame, I do that as well. The easiest way to move the head frame around in this particular case is just to use your arrow keys on your keyboard. So the left key will move your frame to the left, the right key will move your frame to the right, up and down as well. So I just went frame by frame and used the arrow keys to move the head around so it's centered inside this box. This is a completely avoidable process by just filming your head in a stable position, but it really depends what you want to do with your disembodied head. The next step is going to be to track the location where you want to put your head. Now, this is obviously going to be dependent upon what you plan to do with your head. You can just stick it on a table and have it not move at all. In my case, I wanted it on top of this PVC pipe. So I created a paddle on top of the PVC pipe with some markers that I could track. The next thing you do is go and select your tracker. Then you want to select track motion. If you have the proper clip selected, it should put that in your motion source, and your track type is going to be transform. Now you want to select position, rotation, and scale, and you see on the screen it creates these two tracker boxes right here. I usually expand these out and then I'm going to move them onto my track points. Now these trackers have two boxes. The small box on the inside should surround your tracking point. The larger box on the outside is going to be the area where it looks for where that tracking point moved to. The larger you make this outside track box, the more search area After Effects has to look for that tracker. This can be good because it'll look farther when the marker moves fast, but it's also bad because it takes a lot longer for it to look. So you don't want these boxes on the outside to be any bigger than they absolutely have to be. Once you have your tracker boxes set up where you want them, go ahead and click this little play button in the tracker, and you're going to notice that it tracks the motion of those two markers. Now you have to be attentive when you're doing this and be prepared to click the little stop button and move your trackers back to the center of your tracking markers if necessary. Depending upon how fast you end up moving your paddle or whatever it is you're going to track your head to, you might have to manually move these on occasion. Once you've fully tracked your scene, you want to right click down in this layer name area and select create a null object. Then go ahead back up into your tracker and click edit target. In layer, you want to select your null object that you just created and then click OK. And then down in the tracker, go ahead and click apply. Here's where it gets fun. Now we have applied our tracking data for the paddle to the null object. What you want to do is select the head layer. Go ahead and take this little peg whip and parent the head layer to the null object. This means that the head layer is going to use that tracking data to move it around. Now I'm going to go ahead and make my head layer visible. Then I'm going to go into the transform of the head layer. Then I'm going to use the transform here to move the position of the head and the scale to make it exactly the way I want it. Make sure the rotation is proper on top of the pole. That way it will use the tracking data for all of the rest of the information. And then once this is done, I can click play and we see the head moving with the paddle. It's really that simple. The next thing I want to do is select my background layer. That's the layer with my body and the PVC pipe. Then I'm going to click Command D to duplicate this layer. Then I just rename everything so I have a better idea of what I'm dealing with. The next part of the process might be different depending upon how you decide to do your background. In my particular case, I'm going to use the same background, my studio background, as the background for my shot. But this creates an interesting problem. The easiest way for me to do this would be to rotoscope out my head and the paddle I used for tracking and just have a static picture of the background that would replace the head and the paddle. Unfortunately, this didn't work as well as I would hope because standing in front of the background makes the coloring much different than not standing in front of the background. So any static shot that I get of my background looks a lot brighter. If I had shot my body in front of a green screen, this wouldn't really be a problem. But unfortunately, I can't just replace the rotoscoped areas with a background shot because the coloring is so different. So what I decided to do instead is rotoscope my body without the head and the pole and then place them in front of a blank background. The reason why I duplicated the background layer is because I'm going to go ahead and find a frame from that without me in it, and then I'll just use that as a still shot that will remain the background for the entire clip. Needless to say, your good planning can eliminate this entire step, but the rotoscoping process is exactly the same as rotoscoping your head. I just go ahead and select areas that I want to keep with my rotoscope tool, and I go frame by frame through the whole process until my head, the paddle, and the background are completely removed. The next thing I did was create a still image for my background. I was going to just use a frame hold in After Effects, but I figured just a static image might be easier on the system. So I just put a clip in Premiere that I knew had the static background. I clicked the little frame capture button, saved the name of my still, and saved it to a location that I could find it. Then in After Effects, I dragged that image onto the timeline. You can see it appears on top. I just drag that image all the way to the bottom of the composition, so it's underneath all the layers, and boom. Now you can see that that background has replaced the black background and is not going to give me any coloration problems. Now I've showed you the process of removing your head, how to add that head to an object that's being tracked, and also how to remove everything else so you can place it in front of whatever background you want. This process took hours, and after I did each initial step, I went back through and cleaned things up. Because when you watch it, you're always going to find frames that just don't match up or they don't look right. This process can take hours, and if you're going to test it out, I would test it on a small clip to see what you think. The next thing I did is I went in and added a whole bunch of embellishes, like a bloody stump and some blood effects and things like that. And I'm not going to show you how to do that in this tutorial because it would just go on way too long. But if it's something you're interested in learning how to do, go ahead and leave me a comment below and let me know. But without further ado, here's the clip that we created with this tutorial. Enjoy! A wise man once said, "Love with all your heart. Use your head for everything else." He died of a concussion. Why does all the blood rush to your head when you're upside down, but not to your feet when you're right side up? Your feet aren't empty. That one left my head spinning. What did the Headless Horseman say when leaving the party? I'll be heading out then. Didn't like that one, huh? I'm not really sure that went to plan, but then again, that's just like life. It gets pretty messy. If you want to learn about a cool free tool you can use to create your thumbnails, check this video out right here. Or if you want to see a video YouTube recommends, check this one out right here. If tips, tricks, hints, and tutorials about how you could become a better filmmaker and YouTuber are your thing, please subscribe to the channel and click that bell so you know when I have new content that comes out. Thank you so much for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. No wait, someone, help, oh, no, no, no. That's gonna hurt in the morning.